In the far reaches of the galaxy, on a planet far from the reaches of Earth, the most brilliant minds from across the stars gathered. The galaxy's best scientists, engineers, and strategists, creatures of unimaginable intelligence, had come together for one purpose. They were about to face a challenge unlike any they had encountered before. The task was simple on paper. They had been handed a homework assignment by the Deathworlders, beings from a planet so harsh that only the toughest species could survive its deadly conditions. This task was something that, at first glance, seemed like child's play. At least, that's what the galaxy's scientists assumed. The scientists exchanged nervous glances as they shuffled through the papers. The task was labeled Simple Challenge. But as they read it, they all had the same thought. This can't be right. The instructions were basic, too basic. Solve a series of problems involving natural forces that govern the universe, things that were widely understood by every advanced species. How could this possibly be challenging? But as they all gathered around the holographic table in the main conference room, a sense of unease started to settle in. A young scientist, Dr. Lessa, was the first to speak. She was known across the galaxy for her sharp mind and unrivaled knowledge of the most complex scientific fields. "We're missing something," she said softly, looking up from the homework. "This task, it feels wrong." The other scientists laughed nervously. Surely, she was overthinking it. They were among the greatest minds in the universe. A challenge like this would surely be a walk in the park. The task was simple. Calculate the efficiency of several energy systems based on principles like thermodynamics, entropy, and momentum. Nothing too difficult. But when Dr. Lessa looked closer at the problem, she realized that it wasn't the task itself that was strange. It was the way it was worded. There was something hidden in the instructions, something that didn't add up. "Are we sure this is from the Deathworlders?" asked Dr. Torvak, a grizzled veteran of many scientific expeditions. He was the one who had first made contact with the Deathworlders, and he had no doubt in his mind that their technology and intellect were beyond anything the galaxy had ever known. But this task seemed different. "Yes, the data checks out," replied Dr. Lessa, "but it's too straightforward. It's almost like it was meant to be misinterpreted." The group fell silent. They had all heard stories about the Deathworlders' incredible ability to create problems that were unsolvable, that defied the very laws of physics. But they didn't expect a simple homework task to leave them so confused. "This could be a test," said Dr. Harrow, a scientist who specialized in alien technologies. "Maybe they're testing us, seeing if we can solve something simple in a new way." A low murmur of agreement swept through the group. The Deathworlders were known for being unpredictable. Their homeworld was so dangerous that only the fittest survived. They had created machines that operated on principles the galaxy's greatest minds couldn't even comprehend. So, what was the point of a simple challenge like this? Was there something deeper, more sinister hidden in it? "Let's begin," Dr. Lessa said, her voice steady despite the nervous energy in the room. She activated the holographic display, and the challenge came to life in front of them. It was an array of basic equations. At least, that's what they appeared to be. Nothing complicated, or so they thought. Each scientist approached the challenge with their own area of expertise, trying to solve the equations with their advanced knowledge. They tried to apply their standard solutions, calculating energy outputs, efficiency levels, and mechanical reactions. But the more they worked on it, the more confused they became. The numbers weren't adding up. The equations refused to behave in predictable ways. The results they expected didn't match the ones they were getting. It was as if the laws of the universe were bending and shifting right before their eyes. One by one, the scientists realized that they were stuck. Their usual methods weren't working. They had reached the limits of their knowledge, and they couldn't move forward. The energy in the room shifted. What had started as lighthearted amusement was now turning into frustration. "I don't get it," Dr. Torvak muttered under his breath. He had worked on some of the most advanced alien technologies in the galaxy, and yet this simple task was baffling him. These numbers should make sense, but they don't. Dr. Lessa, feeling the pressure mounting, stared at the equations. There had to be something they were missing, some key that would unlock the mystery. But no matter how she approached it, she couldn't find the solution. And that's when it hit her. The answer wasn't in the numbers or equations themselves. The answer was in how they were interpreting them. "This isn't about the equations," she whispered. "It's about the way they're framed. The Deathworlders, they never think the way we do. They see the universe in a completely different way." The group fell silent as they realized the magnitude of what was happening. They weren't just solving a simple homework task. They were being forced to think in ways they never had before. The Deathworlders had set a trap, a test not only of intelligence but of perception. If the scientists couldn't solve this problem, they would have to accept that the Deathworlders were leagues ahead of them in ways they had never imagined, and they had just begun to understand how deep that gap really was. The atmosphere in the conference room grew heavy with frustration and confusion. The task, which had seemed so straightforward, now hung over the scientists like an impenetrable fog. They had attempted every approach they could think of, standard formulas, advanced algorithms, and even experimental methods, but nothing worked. The equations refused to make sense, and the solutions they expected never came. Dr. Lessa paced back and forth, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was being overlooked. The galaxy's best minds were stumped by a simple problem. There had to be more to this challenge than they realized. But what were they missing? "I've tried everything," muttered Dr. Torvak, his voice laced with disbelief. "It's like the numbers are changing. Impossible. I've never seen anything like this." Dr. Lessa stopped pacing and turned to face the group. She had been working on this for hours, but something was nagging at the back of her mind. She was beginning to suspect that the answer wasn't hidden in the numbers, but in something far deeper, something far more intuitive. The Deathworlders weren't just testing their knowledge of physics or energy systems. They were challenging their perception of how the universe worked. "They're playing with us," she said aloud, as the realization began to dawn on her. "The Deathworlders aren't just testing our ability to solve problems. They're testing how we think. They want us to understand that our methods aren't the only way to interpret the universe." A murmur of uncertainty rippled through the group. The idea was radical, but it made sense. The Deathworlders had always been known for their unpredictable ways. Their homeworld was a place where survival required the ability to think outside the box, where rules were meant to be bent, not followed. Could it be that the task they had been given was designed to break the very framework of how the galaxy's brightest minds saw the world? "We've been looking at this all wrong," Dr. Lessa continued, her voice gaining confidence. "This homework isn't about applying our knowledge. It's about unlearning everything we know." Dr. Harrow, the alien technology expert, leaned forward. "Unlearning? How? The task is supposed to be solvable with the tools we already have. That's the way it's always worked for us." "But that's the point," Dr. Lessa said. "The Deathworlders don't use the same tools. Their methods are alien to us, not because they're inferior, but because they're based on a different understanding of the universe. They've evolved to think in ways we can't even comprehend." There was a long silence as the scientists absorbed her words. They had spent so much time trying to apply their conventional scientific methods to the task that they had never considered the possibility that they needed to let go of their preconceived notions. The silence in the room was thick, oppressive. Lessa's hands trembled as she stood up, her newfound abilities filling her with both a strange sense of power and a chilling unease. The transformation had worked. She could feel the change inside her, but the true test was still ahead. Humanity had evolved, but was it enough to protect them from the Deathworlders? Or, worse, had they simply unleashed a force far greater than they could handle? Lessa turned to face the team, her eyes sharp with a new awareness. "We've unlocked something incredible, but we need more. This isn't just about surviving anymore. It's about understanding what's coming for us. We've made an enemy of the universe's deadliest species, but there's something bigger at play. Dr. Harrow, who had been watching with a mix of awe and fear, stepped forward. What do you mean? Are you saying the Deathworlders are just the beginning? Lessa nodded slowly. Yes, we've seen their power, their unpredictability. But there's a reason they attacked us. Something more than just us being a threat. They're afraid. There's a darker force, one we've only just begun to see. And it's coming for all of us. The room fell silent again, but the unease had shifted from Lessa to everyone present. The reality was settling in. Their survival had always been dependent on overcoming individual threats, but now they had to face a much larger, more complex web of dangers. Lessa could feel it in her bones. The galaxy was changing. Humanity had been thrust into a game they were not prepared for. What is this darker force? General Corin asked, his voice low. He had always been a soldier, trained for battle, but this was something new, something beyond his understanding. Lessa's eyes narrowed. I don't know, but it's out there, watching us. And it won't stop until it has everything. The Deathworlders know this. Why do you think they came for us? They see the writing on the wall. We're just a small part of something much larger. The room was full of whispers now. Panic began to bubble to the surface. Had they just signed humanity's death sentence by provoking the galaxy's deadliest species? Or had they only ignited the spark for an even greater war? We have to prepare, Lessa continued. We need to form alliances. But we also need to strengthen ourselves. The Deathworlders were just the first step. They have their own fears, but they will soon realize they're not the greatest threat. We need to be ready for what's coming. Corin looked at her, his expression grim. What if we can't prepare in time? What if we're not strong enough? Lessa turned away, her mind already racing with strategies and possibilities. But for the first time, a deep dread took root inside her heart. The human spirit, resilient as it was, had never faced an adversary like this. And the galaxy, it was about to change forever. We'll find a way, she said, her voice resolute, but the weight of the unknown pressed on her chest. We have to, because if we fail, everything we fought for will be gone. The lights in the room flickered briefly, and for a moment, the air felt heavy, charged with something that could only be described as impending doom. Lessa knew they were not alone in this fight, and the greater war was only beginning. Lessa nodded. In a way, yes. They're showing us how out of touch we are with the true nature of survival. We've been focused on technology, strategy, and dominance, but the Deathworlders are showing us that survival isn't about conquering the environment. It's about adapting to it, living in it, becoming part of it. They've turned our understanding of intelligence and evolution upside down. Dr. Harrow, still stunned by the implications, spoke up. But what are we supposed to do now? How do we fight an enemy who can out-evolve us at every turn? Lessa's eyes narrowed. We don't fight them. Not in the way we thought. We have to evolve too. And we need to do it fast. The tension in the room escalated. The threat was no longer external. The Deathworlders had forced them into a corner where the only option was transformation. The scientists felt helpless, like players in a game they didn't know how to win. Suddenly, a new message flashed onto the display. A simple, cryptic phrase that chilled everyone to their core. Adapt or be destroyed. The words burned into their minds. They were no longer just a warning. They were a declaration. The galaxy's greatest minds were now confronted with an ultimatum. The Deathworlders had shown them what true survival looked like, and it was something they had never even considered. The rules of the game had shifted. To face the Deathworlders, they had to rethink everything they knew about intelligence, evolution, and power. The scientists were not just facing an external enemy. They were facing the terrifying realization that their very way of thinking needed to change. How do we even begin? Dr. Lessa whispered. Before anyone could respond, a strange noise echoed through the lab. The doors slid open, and a tall figure stepped inside. It was the galaxy's top strategist, General Corrin, known for his brilliant tactics in battle. His face, usually filled with confidence, was now etched with grim determination. "Admiral, scientists," Corrin began, "we've just received a report from the front lines. The Deathworlders have begun to attack in ways we never predicted. They're no longer just holding back. They're pushing us to the brink of total collapse. Our forces are being wiped out, one by one. And it's only going to get worse." Dr. Lessa's mind raced. She had feared it was only a matter of time before the Deathworlders took their tests to the next level, but hearing it from General Corrin made the threat feel all too real. "We have no time left," General Corrin continued. "We need a solution, and we need it now. The Deathworlders are evolving faster than we are, and it's only a matter of time before they decide we're not worth their attention anymore. We must evolve. Now." Lessa turned to her team, her thoughts racing. The message was clear. The Deathworlders had already won the first round, but there was still time for them to adapt. If they could somehow unlock the next phase of human evolution, it was the only chance they had to survive. Her voice was steady, but inside, she felt the pressure mounting. "We need to find a way to evolve. Fast, no matter the cost." But as the gravity of the situation settled in, a horrifying question lingered in the back of her mind. What if evolution itself wasn't enough? The galaxy's fate was now tied to humanity's ability to adapt. But even as they scrambled for a solution, they all knew one undeniable truth. This wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a race against extinction. As the situation grew more dire, Dr. Lessa and her team were thrust into an uncharted realm of possibility. They had learned the lesson the Deathworlders had forced upon them. Survival didn't come from technology alone. It came from evolution. But what if they couldn't evolve quickly enough? What if humanity's natural capabilities weren't enough? The lab, once filled with excited chatter and theoretical debates, now felt like a pressure cooker. Each scientist worked feverishly, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge and even ethics. DNA sequences flashed across the screens, and the room hummed with the sound of constant data processing. The galaxy's brightest minds were on the verge of something unthinkable, attempting to speed up humanity's own evolutionary process. Lessa stood before the screen, staring at the complex genetic maps. Her thoughts were clouded with doubt, but she couldn't afford the luxury of second-guessing. The Deathworlders had taught them that survival was about adaptability, not domination. And if humanity was to stand a chance, they needed to adapt, and fast. "We're playing with fire," Dr. Harrow said, his voice strained. "We don't know what this will do. We've never attempted anything like this before. If we manipulate our genes, there's no turning back." Lessa glanced at him, her jaw set in determination. "If we don't, we'll be wiped out. We're not fighting an enemy. We're fighting an entire new model of existence. We need to evolve beyond our limits or face extinction." She turned her gaze to the genetic algorithm they had created. The code wasn't just about increasing physical strength or resilience. They needed to enhance intelligence, adaptability, and even instinct. The Deathworlders had shown them that intelligence wasn't just about raw calculation. It was about survival and adaptability, often in the most extreme conditions. General Corrin entered the room again, his footsteps heavy with the weight of his mission. He was no longer the confident strategist they had known. He was a man on the edge, consumed by the fear of their impending doom. "How close are we?" Corrin's voice was sharp, desperate. "We're close," Lessa replied, though she didn't feel it in her heart. The data was coming together, but it was still a massive gamble. They were about to introduce a level of genetic manipulation never before seen by the galaxy. It would mean altering the very nature of what it meant to be human. The risks were immeasurable. What if they couldn't control the changes? What if humanity's core essence was lost in the process? "Just make sure it works," Corrin said, his eyes locked onto Lessa. "If it doesn't, we're finished." Lessa swallowed hard. It will work. But deep down, she knew no one could be certain. The team continued their work late into the night. Hours bled into each other, and the silence in the room grew heavier with each passing minute. Then, just as Lessa was starting to lose hope, a breakthrough came. The genetic sequence had been unlocked. The final test was ready. "What now?" Dr. Harrow asked. His voice wavered, but his hands were steady as they began the final stage of the process. Lessa took a deep breath. "Now we begin the most dangerous phase. We test the algorithm. We give it to one of us." All eyes turned to Lessa. "You volunteered," Harrow murmured. "Are you sure?" She nodded, without a hint of hesitation. "I'm the only one who understands the risks, and I'm the only one who can handle the consequences." With that, she stepped forward. The room fell into an uneasy silence, each person realizing the enormity of what was about to happen. No one could know for sure what would come of the genetic manipulation. Would Lessa change into something beyond recognition? Would she be able to maintain control of herself? "Are you ready?" Corin asked, his voice softer than it had been all day. Lessa closed her eyes for a moment, preparing herself for what was to come. She had no choice. Humanity had no choice. The galaxy had no choice. It was all riding on this one decision. "Do it," she said, her voice firm. The machines hummed as they activated. The genetic data transferred into Lessa's cells. She could feel the change happening, an overwhelming rush of energy and awareness, like nothing she had ever experienced before. Her mind stretched to comprehend more, faster, deeper. Her senses sharpened. Her thoughts raced with precision. It was like she could see the universe itself unfolding before her eyes. But with this newfound ability came a terrifying realization. She could feel the entire galaxy's struggles, the pulse of life across planets and species, each one struggling to adapt. The Deathworlders had somehow tapped into this deeper level of understanding. And now, so had she. As the process finished, Lessa collapsed, overwhelmed by the intensity of the transformation. The room was silent as everyone watched her. Lessa's eyes fluttered open, her body still trembling. But her mind was clear, clearer than it had ever been before. "We did it," she whispered. But even as she spoke, there was no joy in her words. They had succeeded in adapting, but had they done enough? Would this be enough to face the Deathworlders? The galaxy was still out there, and they were no closer to understanding what it truly meant to survive. Dr. Harrow, who had been working with alien technologies for decades, stepped forward. His hands were trembling as he adjusted the hologram, zooming in on the models of the Deathworlders' planet. "I think she's right. The task isn't linear. We've been stuck on this idea that there's a single correct answer. But what if there isn't one?" The group fell silent, each scientist lost in their own thoughts. The magnitude of what they were facing was beginning to sink in. This wasn't just a challenge. It was a test of their very understanding of the universe. Could they adapt fast enough to stay ahead of a species that had been evolving on a death world for millennia? Or were they doomed to fail? "The Deathworlders aren't just different," Dr. Lessa said, her voice growing steadier. "They're on a completely different plane of existence. They've learned to thrive in chaos, to embrace the unknown. Their strength lies in their ability to adapt, not in their ability to conquer." As the words settled over the room, a sense of dread and awe filled the air. They were facing an enemy who didn't play by the same rules, who didn't see the universe the same way they did. Their very survival depended on thinking in ways they had never been trained to think. They were being pushed to their limits and beyond. Dr. Torvak, one of the top theorists in quantum mechanics, stared at the holograms. His face was pale, his mind trying to process the implications of what had just been said. "So, what do we do now?" Dr. Lessa took a deep breath, her eyes narrowing as she stared at the chaotic, ever-changing models of the Deathworlders' world. It was unpredictable, a place where the laws of nature were constantly in flux. There was no order, no stability, only chaos. "We adapt," she said, her voice firm. "We stop looking for the perfect answer and start embracing the idea that there is no single answer. The universe is unpredictable, and if we want to survive, We have to learn to think like the Deathworlders. We have to learn to think beyond the rules. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that none of them had anticipated. For the first time, they realized just how far behind they were. The Deathworlders weren't just solving problems. They were shaping reality itself. And the galaxy's brightest minds were being forced to evolve if they were to keep up. But as they stood there, contemplating the enormity of what lay ahead, a cold truth settled in. Even if they could adapt, would it be enough? Could they survive the storm that the Deathworlders were about to unleash? The task that had once seemed like a simple assignment had now become a war of minds, a battle for survival against a species that had mastered the art of chaos. And in that moment, they knew there was no going back. The team of scientists stood frozen, staring at the chaotic simulation of the Deathworlders' planet. It was like nothing they had ever seen before, a world that bent the laws of physics, a place where survival itself was a mind-bending puzzle. The Deathworlders didn't just thrive there, they ruled it, their every move designed to outsmart, outmaneuver, and outlast the dangers of their unpredictable environment. Dr. Lessa's mind raced. She couldn't help but feel a mixture of admiration and dread for the species that had created such a chaotic, yet flawless, system of existence. The task they had been assigned now felt so insignificant, so trivial, in comparison to the complexity of the world the Deathworlders had mastered. She had assumed that she and her team were here to solve a simple problem, some theoretical exercise to prove their scientific prowess. But this was far more than that. She turned to her colleagues. What we're dealing with is a species whose entire survival is based on unpredictability. We can't predict them. We can't even begin to understand their logic, because it's not based on the same principles we use. Dr. Torvak, the quantum mechanic, spoke with his usual calm demeanor. But now, even his voice carried an edge of uncertainty. If we can't understand their logic, how can we even begin to compete with them? For the first time, the question was not rhetorical. He was genuinely asking, could they truly outsmart the Deathworlders, or had they underestimated them so gravely that the galaxy itself was now at risk? Dr. Lessa stood still for a moment, her fingers lightly tapping the display as she thought. The holographic images flickered before her, new, strange data patterns that appeared and disappeared too quickly for her to keep up. As fast as they processed the data, the Deathworlders seemed to change the parameters, adjusting the very nature of the test. We have to think outside of everything we know, she finally said, her voice sharp, as if she'd come to a sudden revelation. We've been playing by the rules of our own understanding, but they have no rules. This isn't just a test. It's an evolution of thought, an entirely new paradigm that we're trying to wrap our minds around. Dr. Harrow stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. He was a leading expert on alien technologies, but even he looked rattled by the complexity of what they were facing. What if this is a mistake? What if they're not trying to show us how smart they are, but how different they are? What if they want us to fail? Lessa stared at him for a long moment. They wouldn't waste their time if they didn't believe we could learn something. But that doesn't mean they'll make it easy for us. The door to the lab slid open, and a figure entered, the head of the Galactic Science Division, Admiral Celine. She was known for her unshakable confidence and her ability to see the bigger picture. But today, her face was strained, her eyes clouded with concern. Dr. Lessa, I need a report, Celine said, her voice steady, though her posture was tense. Lessa swallowed hard before answering. We've reached a critical point, Admiral. The Deathworlders are testing us in ways we didn't anticipate. Our team is struggling to keep up with their unpredictability. Every time we think we have the solution, they shift the parameters again. Celine's expression darkened. This isn't just an academic exercise, is it? What if this is their way of showing us how dangerous they are? The room fell silent. The gravity of the situation was dawning on everyone. The Deathworlders weren't just proving their superiority. They were sending a message, one that transcended intellectual competition. Dr. Harrow, who had been silent for a while, spoke up. The galaxy has underestimated them for so long. And now they're showing us exactly how wrong we've been. The Deathworlders have created an environment that is constantly evolving, constantly changing. They live in a state of constant chaos. We think we can master it. But what if we're not supposed to? Dr. Lessa looked back at the simulation. A new message blinked onto the screen. You've adapted. Now it's time to evolve. She knew immediately what it meant. The Deathworlders were done testing their intelligence. Now they were testing their very capacity to evolve, to change the way they thought, to adapt not just to their challenges, but to the essence of their very being. We have no choice, Dr. Lessa said, a new determination in her voice. We have to evolve, or we'll be left behind. But as she said it, she felt a cold chill creep into her bones. Evolution wasn't just a metaphor anymore. If they couldn't evolve quickly enough, they would be crushed under the weight of the Deathworlders' genius. Their survival was no longer in their hands. It was in the hands of something far bigger, far more complex than they had ever imagined. And in that moment, they all realized the terrible truth. The galaxy's most brilliant minds were no longer in control. The Deathworlders had already won the battle for the future. The room fell into a heavy silence. No one knew what to say. The Deathworlders had just proven their greatest weapon, the power to force evolution itself. What began as a scientific challenge had now turned into a fight for survival. The next move was theirs, and it was impossible to predict. Dr. Lessa's heart raced. She stared at the holographic display, but the data was now almost incomprehensible. The calculations and patterns they had once relied on to explain the universe no longer applied. The Deathworlders had introduced a new kind of logic, one that was neither linear nor predictable, but entirely alien to their understanding of science. "Admiral," Lessa finally said, breaking the silence, "we're facing something we can't fight. The Deathworlders. They're not just testing our intelligence, they're forcing us to evolve. If we don't figure this out, we won't survive." Admiral Celine stood at the back of the room, her gaze fixed on the display. She had always been pragmatic, a warrior first and foremost. But now, even she seemed shaken. The Deathworlders were unlike anything she had ever encountered. They weren't just a threat. They were an entire system, an ecosystem of intelligence that could adapt faster than anything the galaxy had ever seen. "You're saying they're playing with us?" Celine asked, her voice cold but filled with an edge of uncertainty. Dr. Lessa activated a new hologram on the table, a model of the Deathworlders' planet. It was a wild, untamed place, with constantly shifting terrain and unpredictable weather patterns. It was a world where the laws of nature were in a constant state of flux, a world that required its inhabitants to be flexible, adaptable, and ruthless. No rigid scientific system could thrive there. The Deathworlders' intelligence had evolved in a completely different direction, one that didn't rely on the rigid rules of the galaxy's other species. The Deathworlders see the universe not as a series of equations to be solved, Dr. Lessa said, but as a complex, ever-changing puzzle. Their approach to science isn't about finding the perfect solution. It's about understanding the flow of energy, the ebb and the flow of forces, and how they can manipulate them. What we're looking at here is a form of science that doesn't rely on structure. It's about intuition, about recognizing patterns that we can't even begin to understand. The realization hit the group like a wave. They weren't just up against the Deathworlders' knowledge. They were up against a way of thinking that defied all logic. "How do we even begin to think like that?" asked Dr. Torvak, his voice filled with awe. Dr. Lessa stared at the hologram, lost in thought. "We start by breaking free from our own assumptions. We stop trying to solve the task the way we've always been taught. We need to think like the Deathworlders, like survivors in a world where the usual rules don't apply." A heavy silence filled the room as the implications of this idea settled in. The task had been simple at first glance, but the Deathworlders had turned it into a test of their minds, their ability to break free from the chains of conventional science. And now, The galaxy's greatest scientists were realizing that they had underestimated the Deathworlders in the most dangerous way possible. "We're not just dealing with an alien species," Dr. Lessa said slowly, her voice tinged with awe and fear. "We're dealing with a species that thinks in ways we can't even begin to imagine." As the group absorbed the enormity of this challenge, a sense of dread began to seep in. What if the Deathworlders were simply playing with them, testing their limits before revealing something far more dangerous? The task had only just begun, but already they were questioning everything they thought they knew. The conference room felt colder now. Despite the high-tech climate controls, an overwhelming sense of unease permeated the air. The scientists, once brimming with confidence, now looked tired and uncertain. It wasn't just the task that had worn them down. It was the realization that they were facing something far beyond their understanding. Dr. Lessa stared at the holographic display, her mind racing. The equations still didn't add up. The expected results never came. But now there was something else at play, an underlying complexity that had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface. She could feel it, as if the answer was just out of reach, a riddle waiting to be unraveled. But how? "We've made a huge mistake," she muttered to herself. "It's not about the numbers. It's about how we look at them." The others gathered around her, their eyes filled with a mix of frustration and curiosity. They had spent so much time on the technical details, thinking they could apply the same old methods. But now they realized that the Deathworlders weren't testing their intelligence in the way they had assumed. They were testing their adaptability, their ability to think differently. "I think I know what we're missing," Dr. Lessa said, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear. "We've been trying to solve this the way we would any other problem. But what if the Deathworlders are challenging us to think in a completely new way? What if this task isn't about solving the problem? It's about breaking our minds open." Her words hung in the air like a question, one that the others were afraid to answer. The Deathworlders were masters of chaos, of unpredictability. Their homeworld was a place where survival meant constant adaptation, constantly shifting in response to an ever-changing environment. It wasn't about applying the same solutions over and over. It was about being fluid, understanding that answers could change in the blink of an eye.